Thanks, pal.
So Jim Norton's back. And now, here's Jimmy.
Hold on a second, Sam. Make sure I'm on.
You are.
So I'm blogging for Scientology, Hurt You at the Village Voice.
You practicing?
And what was the seventh question?
I believe it was, how big's your cock?
Where's your cock? Okay, let's bring in Tony Ortega.
All right, we're ready then. Okay, all right.
And he's on Jim's mic. Hold on. There we go. Hello, Tony Ortega. How are you?
How's it going, man? Sit down, have a seat.
Our guest who writes Tony Ortega, it's ortega.org.
Yeah.
And Tony Ortega 94 on Twitter, promoting The Unbreakable Miss Lovely. It's a book about a woman named Paulette Cooper. When you were blogging about Scientology, did it hurt you at the Village Voice?
Did it hurt me?
Yeah.
It was the most read thing we had in the company at the time.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
But I left to do that book. I had met Paulette, and it was I knew it was kind of a rare opportunity. And we spent a couple of years on it together. It came out 2 years ago. It's done real well. Just talking to a couple of producers this week about maybe, who knows.
Making a movie?
We'd love to make it into a movie, yeah. But
What got you into Scientology to go like, all right, this is the thing I'm going to write about?
You know, I was a reporter in Phoenix way back in '95, and I just stumbled into a great story. I mean, I had read a letter to the editor in the local daily newspaper that from a guy complaining that his lawsuit had not been covered correctly. So I called him up, looked into it, and sure enough, it was a fantastic story about a guy named Rick Ross, who today is one of the most well-known cult experts.
Oh.
Not the rapper.
Oh,
No.
okay,
How about Freeway Rick, the real one?
But not Freeway Rick Ross
Not
either.
the crack dealer either?
Not him either.
Okay.
That's the good one.
And just one story led to another, and 20 years later, I'm still writing about it. And I think part of what keeps me going is it's just such a fascinating time in Scientology's history. It's going through several crises. It's splitting apart, and I just there's something new every day.
Well, here's why. I mean, the reason your name came up in conversation, and we were like, we should try to get Tony on the show, is because we had Giovanni Ribisi on. I guess a couple weeks ago at this point,
right?
And he's a Scientologist, and we ended up talking a little bit about the perception of Scientology and Leah Remini's series and the whole deal. And he was, and he was basically saying that Leah might have spoken to a few people in Scientology, but the vast majority are happy and it's improved their lives, and it's not this and it's not that. And we ended up having a conversation where I'm still a little confused about what makes Scientology, other than that it's new, all that different from any religion. Like, isn't there, if you're going to the extreme side of Catholicism or Christianity, like, aren't there instances of people being excommunicated from those churches and communities pushing them out? It's just happened for so long that maybe it's a little more palatable.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that a lot from people. They say, okay, Scientology has this Xenu character, but, Christianity has angels and devils and hell, and, don't all religions kind of have the same idea? And Alex Gibney asked me that question on his movie Going Clear, and I explained to him one of the things that makes it a little different is that Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they can explain themselves in a few minutes. There's a basic concept to them that doesn't take very long to grasp. Mm-hmm. And you can be in them for a long time, and there are more, sort of extreme versions of them, and there's a lot of lore to learn. But that basic idea of what Christianity is doesn't change. Scientology tells you when you first come in that it's applied philosophy to help you with your communication skills, and you're asked to pay $50 for a course. It's not until you've been in for several years and you've paid several $100,000 that they start to level with you about what it's really about, and that you're going to end up paying $1,000 an hour for counseling to remove unseen alien souls that are attached to your body for years.
Do you have to? Meaning, is there a version of Scientology that's the guy who goes to church once a month?
On Christmas and Easter,
yeah. Can you just go to, I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm a Scientologist, but not really practicing.
Not really, and that's why I find the Tom Cruise video so fascinating. Remember the video that came out that was leaked to the internet back in 2008?
Yeah, it didn't do him any favors.
And he was wearing a black turtleneck, and he was talking, and most of what he's saying just doesn't, you don't even know what he's saying, but there's one thing he said in particular you should pay attention to. He talks about a policy called KSW. That's really something, he says, KSW. What he's talking about is this thing called keeping Scientology working. And it's exactly answers the question you just asked, which is, if you're going to be a Scientologist, you have to be in all the way. And that's what he's talking about in that video. Keeping Scientology working is this policy that every Scientologist has to memorize. I mean, ask any Scientologist and they'll just reel it off the top of their heads. And what it says is that everything in your life has to be dedicated to Scientology. You cannot look at other things. Scientology is the answer. And not only that, but it has to be the version of Scientology that L. Ron Hubbard came up with. It's the purity that they're after. So there really is no such thing as a casual Scientologist.
So there's only one version of Scientology?
There is not. There are many versions of Scientology,
Okay.
but the church tries to enforce its version. And that's part of why people leave.
I see. So like, with Christianity, people who push it, a born-again Christian that is pushing, like, no, you have to follow the word of the Bible. That's not coming from the church. That's coming from this believer, whereas in Scientology, the church itself as an organization is pushing this by the book.
It is a kind of fundamentalism is what you're
Yes,
talking about.
yes.
And keep in mind that L. Ron Hubbard, when he first came up with this in 1950, he called it science. The first book that came out with is called Dianetics.
Right.
And the subtitle is The Modern Science of Mental Health. And he sold it as a science for a couple of years. And then in 1953 decided to try the religion angle. He literally called it that, the religion angle. And to this day, they really believe that they're not really doing what you do in Christianity or other religions. It is a science to help you remember what happened to you 10 billion years ago through the use of this e-meter machine. And you have to do it exactly the way Hubbard said. Well, the nature of science is that if somebody really did discover something, other scientists should be able to discover the same thing as well.
Of course, it's provable.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So early on, people would leave Dianetics and say, I like what Hubbard came up with, but this is a science. I'm going to explore it myself and come up with my own version. And right from the beginning, there were all kinds of splinter groups and other versions, and L. Ron Hubbard hated that. And he really cracked down. Now, the cynic would say it's because he's missing out on that income.
Sure.
He wants them to do his version only. So to this day, 60 years later, Scientology ruthlessly enforces that idea that you can only get Scientology in one place.
Do they? This is the thing with Scientology. Are they? It struck me, and again, I've never been to a church of Scientology.
Yeah,
Struck me as
right,
a place-
Hollywood.
It struck me. If I thought it would help, believe me, I'd show up. Even they can't help me. It always seemed to me like a haven for people who have sexual secrets, and I know that they get you to confess. And I always thought with certain celebrities, let's just say, or certain public figures, that they get you to confess homosexual things that would be embarrassing to you, and then they have that record of that, and it becomes a
Blackmail.
safe place. I don't even know if it's blackmail or if it just goes unsaid. I don't know how they do it. But is that part of it?
There are no secrets in Scientology. I've heard that so many times from people that were in it, that it doesn't matter who you are. If you're in Scientology, you're going to be put through these, what they call sec checks. They're interrogations. Scientology is a snitching culture. Scientology is an interrogation culture. And not only are you being asked incredibly embarrassing questions about every sex act you've been through in your life, but they're writing it all down.
Right.
And they're creating this giant file. So one of the things that's very difficult for people when they leave Scientology, and why most of them we never hear from, okay, for every Leah Remini, for every Paul Haggis, there are thousands of people who leave and you never hear from them because they're worried that material will be used against them.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Where is it kept?
Oh, they have these massive file. I mean, and it's all on paper. They, to this day, have not computerized. So they have these massive, they call them central files at different facilities around the world.
People write them down.
It's just, the longer you're in Scientology, the massive pile of files that are kept in you. Now, as far as the celebrities, I will say that I think the blackmail angle's been a little overblown on some of these guys. I mean, John Travolta is in Scientology because he is convinced L. Ron Hubbard is responsible for everything good in his life.
Okay.
He's not being held in because he's worried. I mean, they all worry about what's going to be said about them when they leave. But I think Travolta's really convinced, and Tom Cruise is really convinced that he and David Miscavige, the leader, are the two most important human beings on the planet. Right. I talked with somebody that worked very closely with him for 15 years, and the way he said it to me, he said, Tony, Tom Cruise worships David Miscavige like a god. He is a true believer. He's not being kept in through blackmail. He's not, so, but they do keep these files on them, no question.
So what, not what brought you in, but I don't want to use the word obsessed, but this has kind of become your life. Your blog
driven to write about it.
is a daily
Right.
blog about Scientology. Like it seems to be you've adopted this as your calling.
I have always had a great respect for beat reporters. I got to know baseball beat reporters. I got to know government beat reporters. reporters that day in and day out cover one subject so that they know it better than anyone else, and they're there for the big breaking stories. I always admired those people, and at some point I realized I'd like to do that with Scientology. I'm just fascinated by it. There's news coming all over the world. I get tips every day from Australia and Europe and South Africa and South America. I mean, it's just amazing. It's hard for me just to even keep up with it. So, yeah, I mean, if you're a beat reporter, you got to pay attention. You got to work hard, and that's the job I gave myself, and I'm enjoying it.
Go ahead.
So Paulette, that you wrote the book about Paulette Cooper. What is her story? She left Scientology like 71, like when there was. She wrote a book?
She was never a Scientologist. She was one of the first journalists to write about Scientology. Not the first book, but one of the first. It came out in June 1971. It was called The Scandal of Scientology. It was the harshest book written up to that point about all of these. The thing about Scientology, it doesn't change. So the things she wrote about then are still pretty much what's happening now. And they really tried to destroy her. The Scientology has a spy wing. That's another thing that's different than other churches. Scientology actually has a spy corps. Back then it was called the Guardian's Office. Today it's called the Office of Special Affairs.
And I guess that's another reason why you wouldn't be able to just pop into church. Like they have a register of everybody who's
they keep track
a Scientologist.
If you just buy a book, 20 years later they'll send you a letter asking you, why haven't you come in? You know, they keep records on everybody. And they really set out to destroy her life. They framed her for a felony she had not committed. She was facing 15 years in prison. What was the felony? They wrote bomb threats to themselves on her typewriter, got a fingerprint of hers on one of them, and mailed them to themselves.
Can I ask you, a devil's advocate, how do you know she didn't do it?
What's fascinating about her story and what I wrote about was I'm the first journalist ever to talk to her attorneys to find out how she got out of that prosecution. That's in there. But also, several years later, Scientology was the subject of the largest FBI raid in history. It was in July 8, 1977. And they were not raiding over Paulette. They were raiding because Scientology had pulled off the biggest infiltration of our federal government in this country's history. For years, they'd been stealing documents out of government offices, and they were raided, and in those documents, they found the planning documents for framing Paulette.
Wow.
11 top Scientologists went to prison, and it's kind of amazing that Scientology survived that. Back then, it was a huge story, front pages of newspapers.
Wow.
But Scientology's very good at surviving those kind of things. And they've been investigated and denounced by judges and governments, you know, for 50 years, but they still always manage to keep going. They're really resilient that way.
And who's the Miscavige is how you say his name?
David Miscavige.
Miscavige, okay. And how did he become who he is? He seems kind of mysterious. And does he have a wife that no one knows where she is?
Right. Or? He was very young when he got into Scientology, and by the time he was about 14 or 15, he was getting close to L. Ron Hubbard. And L. Ron Hubbard, he managed to get within a small circle near Hubbard when he died. Hubbard died in 1986. And then Miscavige just sort of, muscled his way to the top and pushed other people out of the way and became the total leader of Scientology. And he's been there since 1986. He's still I think he's turning 56 this April. Wow. He married another young Scientologist by the name of Shelley Barnett, and she became a top executive with him. I mean, up until 2005, all the big events, it was Dave and Shelley. Shelley was the one who was auditioning women to be Tom Cruise's girlfriend in 2004.
How would she audition them?
They actually set up these auditions for actresses to come in and read, and only some of them realized that they weren't reading for a part. They were reading to be the role of Tom Cruise's girlfriend
in life.
And one of them was selected. Her name was Nazanin Boniadi. She's on Homeland, and there's a wonderful Vanity Fair story by Maureen Orth about this that came out in 2012 about how they then brought her to New York and got her a new wardrobe, and she was Tom Cruise's girlfriend for 3 months or 4 months.
And she's talked about it publicly?
She has not, but Maureen put that story together talking to the other Scientologists that were around it, and I'm very close to some of the people that are very close to her. There's no question the story is true. And
what happened?
She was Tom's girlfriend from about November 2004 to January 2005. She'd been groomed for it. She was staying with him in his Colorado house. He had a giant Colorado estate at that time. And the reason why he soured on her, reportedly, from people who were there, was that she had a hard time understanding David Miscavige. And it was frustrating because Miscavige has this South Philly accent. He talks kind of fast, and she would have a hard time understanding it, and it just infuriated Miscavige. So Cruise dumped her.
Because, wait, Miscavige didn't like that she didn't understand what he was saying?
Yeah, that was one of the things,
because she would ask him to repeat himself.
Yes.
And he's like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe that's it, or maybe she would just look at him like, what?
What are you talking about?
Did you say what's going on? Shut up. I don't know what you're talking about. Wow, so that's why
she
he
was
dumped
just
her.
before Katie Holmes.
Well,
Oh.
so if they go to all this effort of putting this relationship together and going so far as to cast a girlfriend
Right.
and have them get married,
Right.
and I'm assuming that them having a kid and getting married is part of the routine, not they fell in love after this thing, unless I'm wrong.
Well, I think that, Nazanin really did care for him a great deal, and she was heartbroken when he dumped her. I don't think they auditioned Katie. I think that kind of happened on its own. And then, I really believe that Tom Cruise was very much in love with Nicole Kidman, very much in love with Katie Holmes, and I think they loved him. Both of them made attempts to be part of Scientology. Nicole did quite a bit of Scientology, and then she soured on that. And then, they were married in 1990. By 1992, she had pulled him away from Scientology. We didn't know this at the time. He was actually out of Scientology from 92 to 2000 because of Nicole. And the church managed to keep that quiet. We didn't find out until much later when they broke up at the end of 2000. David Miscavige assigned Marty Rathman. Job one in Scientology was to get Tom back in the fold. So from 2001 to 2004, they really worked on him until they ramped him up so he was the most enthusiastic, gung-ho Scientologist, and that's why they gave him that big medal in October 2004 when they made that video of him.
And you don't think there's something there that people just don't want other people to know? Meaning you don't think that, yeah, they got me back in because eventually this stuff that I don't want people to know will come out.
I think that, like I said, I think it might be part of it. I think that they're concerned about what might be said, but I everybody that worked very closely with the two of them that has talked to me all say that he's a true believer. He really believes this stuff.
And you just said too that he made him feel like the most important person in the world. Like if you can play to somebody's ego, who is already a Tom Cruise of the world, that seems like it could be an effective.
The thing,
method.
Nazanin, in Going Clear, and Alex Gibney got this from FBI testimony, in Colorado at one point, when Tom was angry at Nazanin that she was having a hard time understanding David Miscavige, Tom made a point, and it's on the radio, so you're not going to see it, but he put his hand up and said, "There's LRH, there's David Miscavige, and there's me." And making the
I do that in this room a lot with myself and Sam and Adrian.
That's not fair.
And that's how he sees the world. Is those are the three most important human beings who've ever lived.
How about the books? Was it Jenna Miscavige wrote a book? Was that his niece?
David's niece, Jenna Miscavige Hill, came out with a book that came out in early 2013. It's done very, very well.
Can I ask you? We interviewed her, and I read some of it, but I didn't think there was anything particularly horrendous in that book. And I got the vibe, is she really trying to write about Scientology, or are they kind of approving what she's writing about Scientology?
No, I think the thing that I took away from that book was how brave she was to write how much her uncle seemed to take glee in destroying lives and splitting up families and keeping her from her mother and that kind of thing. She really made her uncle look like a coward.
Okay.
And that's what you're right. There's a lot of other stuff like who her boyfriends were and what it was like growing up in Scientology, which are fun. But I think that was what you should take away from that book. And then there's Ron Miscavige, her grandfather, David Miscavige's father. He came out with a book earlier or last year in May called Ruthless. About he had been in Scientology, and he had been at the international base near Hemet, California, and escaped in 2012.
David's father had to escape.
He had to escape. Yes, and he's been on television a lot, and his book is very interesting. I've written some stories about how Miscavige's own family has been torn apart now, and one interesting person that's involved in all that is Lisa Marie Presley.
Was she a Scientologist?
She's left, and she really helped out Ron, and she tried to have a confrontation with David Miscavige about what he was doing, and he was too afraid to face her.
He wouldn't face her.
He sent his sisters in instead to scream at her.
So with the father, how can the father? What do you mean escape? Can't the father just leave? I mean, if your son runs the whole operation, who's going to stop you from walking out the door?
In base in California, it's about 90 miles east of Los Angeles. It's near Hemet, California. It's a 500-acre compound. And it's got fence with sharp wire on top, and it's clear that it's meant not to keep people from going in, but to keep people from going out. But you talk to anybody that escaped from there, Mark and Claire Headley, John Brousseau, Ron Miscavige, they all tell the same thing, that they had to time it perfectly and fool a guard and get in their car and drive as fast as they could, or Mark had to zip away on a motorcycle and then got run down.
Wait, what if you want to go to the store?
You have to. Well, they have a store on the campus. I was just talking to somebody talking about how much he smoked there. I said, "Well, where'd you get your cigarettes?" He said, "Oh, we have a store on the campus on the compound."
What if you just want to let you go for a drive?
No.
The father of the guy who runs Scientology couldn't get in a car and go for a ride?
And only if it was for as long as the guards knew why and what it was for. Yeah, no, they couldn't.
How do they sell that to you as a person? Like, how do they tell you? Okay, you
it's for your own protection.
I don't get it.
Well, I mean, that's the Sea Org. The Sea Org in particular is fascinating. I mean, they sign a $1 billion contract. They work
for a long time.
They work children. There's a lawsuit in Los Angeles right now about a young woman. She joined the Sea Org when she was 12, signed the $1 billion contract, and then was working 90 hours a week, 7 days a week. Some weeks didn't get paid at all. The most they ever get paid is $50 in a whole week. Did
nobody tell them that a $50 billion year contract or whatever that might not hold up in a court of law?
Yeah,
like there may not be as much
especially when they're 12 years old. I mean, contracts cannot be signed by 12 years old, but she did. She was punished because they found out she'd written a note expressing that she missed her mother. When she was 13, they moved her to the adult schedule, which was 112 hours a week. Again, pennies an hour, 7 days a week.
What are you doing there?
She was doing running. She was mainly, I think it was data acquisition and stuff with the computers, and then she went on for a while. She went on the prison detail, which is called the RPF, and the RPF is just like janitorial stuff. I mean, just menial labor, really, really bad conditions.
Oh.
And she ultimately drank bleach to try to kill herself to get out of it.
Did they get her to the hospital?
Yeah.
Is there a hospital on the campus?
No, they had to take her. Yeah.
Wow. What have they done in response to you? I mean, as sort of out of the closet critical of them as you are.
They try to make it difficult for me. They've anybody,
Do they not like you?
They don't like me too much, and I'm always sending them emails asking them for responses and help me with the data and everything, and they never respond. What they do is they send private investigators around to harass people that I know, loved ones,
but they don't go to you directly.
They never. It's always this real creepy stuff. I was on Leah Remini's show. She had me on, and I told her about one incident where they hired an out-of-work reporter, Daily News reporter, in fact, to pretend that he was working on a big expose about my wife, and he wanted quotes from her employers, claiming that she was some kind of a terrorist just because she'd put some jokes up on the anonymous anonymous forums, and it didn't work. Her bosses stood by her, but it was very, very creepy. They're hoping to get her fired, and that would hurt me.
Yeah.
So they've tried multiple operations like that. Nothing like Paulette. Nobody has faced as much harassment as Paulette, and that's why I wanted to write her story.
What did they do to Paulette?
Well, they got her framed for that one crime, and she was facing 15 years in prison. She came close to killing herself. That fell apart, but then they tried multiple other operations. They were always trying. At one point, they had a private investigator approach her, claiming that he was working for a millionaire who wanted to expose Scientology, and she fell for it and went to work for him, and everything she did was taped and recorded.
Wow.
They sued her 19 different times.
They're very litigious, right?
Yes, and they use a scorched earth tactics in court. I mean,
what do you mean?
Well, even the most black hat Monsanto type of corporation, you figure at some point in court is going to say, let's cut our losses and settle or whatever. Scientology never does that. It's always the most harassment, the most delaying, anything. They're always trying to disqualify attorneys. I mean, I could go through the cases, but it's just they run roughshod over our justice system, our court system.
Is it because they have a lot of money and they know they can out-litigate anybody?
They have so much money. I mean, this whole organization's only got about 20,000 people in it.
Right.
But they've got, 3 or 4 billion, much of it in liquid assets, which they just spend endlessly on private investigators and attorneys.
So you think that's as many people total in the organization? Like that's how many people are Scientologists? 20,000?
Yeah, it's really shrunk down. They never had.
They said 8 million.
They've never had the millions. They've always claimed that. I found a New York Times story from 1969 where they claimed 15 million. They've never had that many. All the top executives that have left now who had access to enrollment documents tell me that the biggest extent was about the year 1990. They had about 100,000 active members. That's shrunk and shrunk. Now, the most recent top executive who defected 2 years ago. His name is Paul Burkhart. I've written about him. He had daily access to reports from all the orgs around the world. I asked him, how big is this thing now? And he said less than 20,000.
Why? What's the main reason, Pete? Because it seems like it used to be such a scary thing. Oh my God, they'll harass you. Now with like all these YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and all these ways for people to speak, that doesn't seem as scary anymore. Is that why people are leaving? Because it seems like people are criticizing them publicly much more than I ever heard before.
Many more people are leaving. I think Miscavige made a mistake when he created this prison for his executives at the base called The Hole in 2004. And he put like 100 executives in this office and closed the door and locked the key and walked away. And they were in there for years, only let out once a day to take a shower.
No.
That's why Marty Rathman escaped. That's why Mike Rinder escaped. These top executives finally had enough. They all left. They all started speaking out publicly in about 2009. Meanwhile, Anonymous had come out in 2008. And Anonymous created a lot of cover for people because there were so many people now online talking about Scientology. There were just too many targets for Scientology to harass.
And they can't fuck. Now Scientology probably is not happy with Anonymous.
Oh, no. And I mean, they're
probably not pleased with their work.
There are so many people now talking about Scientology, writing about it, TV shows. It's hard for Scientology to target so many people. But believe me, they still are targeting people for severe harassment.
So what is the whole? They put was it a punishment? Were they working?
It's such a bizarre situation. It was 2004. Miscavige just took his top 20 or 30 executives, claimed that they were all betraying him, put them in a room and locked the door and said, you guys need to confess your crimes. And then he kept adding people. And 5 years later, the thing was still going. Finally, he had to change it because the Tampa Bay Times revealed its existence in 2009. And so it's gone now. That building is gone, okay? But they still have that group segregated, and they have to eat in a special place and stay in a certain place. I don't think the conditions are as bad as they were. But are
they allowed to just leave the compound?
Not only can they not leave the compound, they're segregated from the rest of the people at the compound. They're a special group. It's called The Hole. And like I said, from 2004 to 2009, those 5 years, it was a prison. They were fed slop out of a bucket. They're made all day. They're just made to confess. It's incredible that a prison like that exists in the United States of America. And
what did they do?
The FBI came very close to raiding the base in the summer of 2010 over that.
Why didn't they?
It's really kind of complex. If you watch Going Clear, Lawrence Wright and Alex Gibney make the case, it was because this other lawsuit had failed. The Headleys, their lawsuit had failed in court because of this First Amendment protection. I think it's more complicated than that. And I've written a long, detailed story about it. You can look up if you look up FBI and Mark Headley on my website, you'll find it. I think it had to do with an FBI agent feeling a pang of conscience about what was going on, and she tried to help out somebody in a lawsuit, and that crossed an ethical line. And Scientology, they have really effective people that can lobby the Justice Department and that kind of thing.
They have good attorneys, don't they?
They have the best. They have the best attorneys. Yeah.
What did the guys do that were being held up in the hole? Did they do nothing, and David Miscavige just got paranoid about it? Were they actually betraying him?
Were they stealing hats?
The Hole or the regular RPF, which is like the regular prison for the people that are there. I always ask them, what did you do? Why were you put in there? Right. And they can't remember. It's so trivial. It's like, I don't know. I just looked at him wrong one day. And no, I mean, Mike Rinder, you can't really remember what it was that first put him in the hole. And it's quite clear that David Miscavige is that kind of a capricious tyrant that you just answer something the wrong way and you're
Well, he got into it young, right? He's 56 and he's been there since 86. He's 20 when he kind of takes over or whatever, right? So you're young. You never, you're thinking like a 20-year-old when you.
Yeah.
He's a high school dropout who, first
Me
got
too.
into Dianetics at 12.
Well, I would say we're both successful, powerful men.
There you go.
Well, you're not all those things.
I am so.
So, what's the response been like for people? Have you seen your work getting more and more responses to it?
Yeah, this is really, people are fascinated by Scientology, and whenever you see a story in a magazine or a newspaper, it's going to be the most read story in that publication that day. And my website it's just me, but I'm getting 10,000 unique visitors a day. It's really doing well.
You got good server strength in that bunker.
Yeah, exactly. And more and more shows are coming. I mean, Leah's show really reached a whole new audience. She did such a good job.
It was a good show. I didn't see it.
Yeah, it's a really
Yeah.
good show. I mean,
Okay.
some of the stories have been told before, but there's something about Leah talking to these people and finding out what they went through that made it very powerful. People really connected with her.
Where is his wife, by the way? Sorry, Sam.
No,
where's
go
Miscavige?
Oh, no, we didn't
Miscavige's
get to,
wife.
okay.
Yeah.
So David Miscavige and Shelley, they ran Scientology together, and then in the summer of 2005, I have several eyewitnesses who were there at the base. He had gone away for a few months, and she took care of some things that had never gotten taken care of because he just would never do them. One of which was there was this list of jobs that needed filling, and so she filled them. The other thing was that they want to renovate a building, so they needed to move his stuff out. So they carefully crated his stuff out. He comes back. The org board, it's called, has been filled in with jobs. His stuff is in crates, and he just went ballistic. He went nuts, and I've got witnesses to this. A week later, she vanished. And I know where she's been. The int base that I've been talking about that has the hole near Hemet is this 500-acre big compound that's secretive, but we have a pretty good idea of who's there and who's coming and going. But Scientology has an even more secret base up in the mountains above Los Angeles near a place called Lake Arrowhead. And that's called CST, which stands for Church of Spiritual Technology. Super secret organization. Most Scientologists don't even know about it. I've rarely met a Scientology executive that knew anything about these places. This base has only maybe 12 or 15 people. She's been there for 11 years.
Wait, so what do you do at that base?
Well, CST has the most bizarre mission. This was created back in the early 80s when Hubbard was still alive. This separate unit of Scientology, that's the headquarter base. And then there's one in New Mexico, a couple more in California. Wow. They dig vaults to store Hubbard's words to last millennia.
Can't they just put a hard drive somewhere?
Well, you would think, because you can. Well, when they first started this thing, yeah, exactly. What they do, they're etching his words on stainless steel plates, storing them in titanium containers, and then putting them in these bomb-proof vaults. And they talk about they want this to last thousands of years.
Wait, why would they do that instead of just getting a machine that does it? You don't have to hand sketch shit. Just get a fucking machine to do it.
Well, remember, Hubbard.
Are they going to bring it to a trophy store? They'll be like, "What's up with this?"
No,
guy?
you build a trophy store.
That's true.
If you're Scientology, you build one.
Hubbard was a science fiction writer. He has this idea that civilization is going to collapse, and then people are going to want to get his wisdom out and rebuild.
These are
going
to be the new hieroglyphics. These are going to be what we find. This is what society was.
Exactly.
So she's up there now. Is she being punished up there? She's not allowed to leave, or you don't know?
She's etching plates.
That's the big question. Is she there on her own, on her own will or not? And Leah Remini filed a missing persons report on her back in 2013, and the LAPD claimed, they told me, that they visited her and she didn't want to make a statement. But I just recently talked to a person who lives only a couple miles from the base who says that they spotted her in town with two handlers, and she looked awful, and she looked really frail. So I am not. I mean, the problem for law enforcement is if they rushed into that base to rescue her, she might say, "No, I'm here working on my own will. I'm happy where I am." I don't think there's any question she was banished there by her husband, but the conditioning in Scientology is so heavy. I don't know that she would come out if she was given the opportunity.
Well, who can't he fuck with? Because he seems like he can do kind of what he wants, but there's got to be someone that he can't fuck with for whatever reason.
At this point, he's done a very good job making sure that the people who might be able to get to him can't. There are these actual documents of boards and trustees and stuff that govern all of these entities, right? And theoretically, it might be possible for those boards of directors to vote him out. But he spent 30 years making sure that's not going to happen, that he's got total control of all that. As far as the government is concerned, the word church is so powerful with people. They hear Church of Scientology, and then they have a cross that looks like a Christian cross, which is intended to fool people. They have nothing to do with Christianity. They don't worship a God. They believe that Jesus Christ was just a mental implant that was put into our minds 75 million years ago. But it's really tough to get government officials to care about this organization.
So what is the end game of Scientology? Like, are they power hungry? Is it the money that is coming from people? Because I can't imagine that it's just they're evil and they just want to be able to destroy families for the sake of it.
Well, what's interesting is that I'm not sure they know what their end game is, because They still call L. Ron Hubbard source. They still believe that everything he wrote is this genius technology, and they're really just following his orders,
So even at the highest levels, they fully believe, like David Miscavige believes the things in those books.
That's what I've been told. That he's actually like he won't go near small children because he's afraid that these unseen entities from them will attach themselves to him. I mean, he's a true believer. But
is that almost like an OCD or a germophobia in a weird way?
It could be, yeah.
Spiritual germophobia.
Well, he won't go to the kids because he thinks they have all these little things.
Well, we all do, but apparently he's particularly afraid of the body thetans that small children have.
Is that why he won't interact? They said he hasn't done live television in 20 years.
The only time he was on live network television was with Ted Koppel on Nightline 25 years ago this week.
Or 25 years.
And
I watched that interview on your website last night.
And he didn't do that badly. I mean, he wasn't great, but it's just a shame he won't give interviews. The last one he actually gave a print interview in 1998, but nothing since then.
He hasn't done an interview since 1998?
Nope.
Does he only want to talk to other Scientologists and be around them?
David Miscavige's entire focus is on the wealthy donors. When he puts an ad on the Super Bowl, when he opens a new place like he did in San Diego a few weeks ago, it's all to convince the wealthy donors that Scientology is actually expanding when they really aren't, because that's what he relies on. Or there's a guy named Trish Duggan. He's a billionaire and he's Scientology. He's the richest Scientologist in the world, and Miscavige really relies on the millions that Duggan gives year after year.
Wow. So I wonder if he doesn't want people around him because he doesn't want their stuff jumping on him.
That's it.
Like regular people. He probably only hangs out with a certain level.
Yeah. Well, very few Scientologists actually get to meet him. You are made to believe. They let you know you're very special if you get to meet him at all.
So where does he live?
On the base, near Hemet, and then he's got an apartment. He's got an interesting apartment. There's right on Hollywood Boulevard, right by Grauman's Chinese. They have a building called Author Services, which is Hubbard's literary agent, where they put out all of his fiction. And right behind it, connected to it, there's an apartment, kind of a hidden apartment where he lives when he's in L.A. He's also got an apartment in Florida.
Is it a nice apartment, the one in L.A.?
It's supposed to be fantastic.
Okay.
I mean, the guy lives lavishly. There's been various exposés about, how much money he spends on just his shoes, his custom-made shoes from England and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, I understand that. He wants to look good. You're running a religion. I would too.
And they have a gourmet kitchen always ready to pump out multiple meals a day anytime he wants to have a bite. Just, the guy lives a very lavish lifestyle. But I
want to hang out. I want him to like me and bring me in, introduce me to some girls. You think he can get you laid?
Oh,
he probably could, right?
Scientology, yeah, sure. Scientology.
Yeah, what's their view of sexuality?
I mean, back in the 70s, that was kind of what Scientology was known for. Was it was an alternative lifestyle, but no drugs. No, it was
right.
It was kind of like, okay, you've done the drugs thing, now come hang out with us. And it was known for you're going to get a date. I mean, they had amazing parties, but I think it's a lot less like that now. I think it's a much more grim sort of environment today.
There's a question coming in about the taxes. We'll go to. I don't know what to ask here. This guy has a. This is Alex in Texas. Alex! Hello, Alex. Do you have your headphones on, Tony? Hello?
Hey, Tony.
Yeah.
You got me? All right. Hey, so I was told, multiple things about taxes. Basically, that L. Ron Hubbard was doing fictional books when he first started, and then he transferred over to science, which you were speaking of. And then he decided to do a religion so he could actually get more tax or more income to the church. And then with that, and I know this is a separate question, but then I heard there was sex parties and different things like that were involved, and government officials in the U.S. government were involved in those. Is that true?
I'll hang up and let Tony answer, okay?
All right, brother.
Thank you, Alex.
Well, there's always a lot of question about what happened with the tax-exempt status. He's right. Hubbard started as a science, and then in 1953 he said, let's try the religion angle, and they started creating Church of Scientology corporations. And they applied for a tax-exempt status and got it, but then they lost it in 1967 because the courts decided that too much money was going to Hubbard personally, and you can't do that in a church. So they lost tax-exempt status in 1967, but he refused to pay. So each year they would get a bigger and bigger tax debt, all the way into he died in 86, late 80s. Marty Rathman has said they were facing $1 billion back tax bill at this point.
This is 20 years, right?
It's $1 a year for the contract.
And they didn't have it. He said, they didn't have that kind of money. They either got tax exempt status or died, right? And so they spent years harassing the IRS and harassing. And
Didn't they sue them personally?
They sued them. They had 2,400 lawsuits going. Wow. They harassed IRS individuals personally. And finally, in 1991, the IRS commissioner at the time, this is under Bush 1, he decided, okay, we'll figure this out, and started a study that 2 years later, 93, under Clinton, they signed tax-exempt status. So people have asked me, what did they do to Goldberg to get him to roll over? But Marty Rathbun has said repeatedly that they just went to his office and told him that all the harassment would stop if they could just work something out. And he really seemed, he said his shoulders slumped. He's like, okay. And the IRS just gave up after all that harassment.
It's kind of hard for me to be mad at Scientology for that one. That one, you gotta fucking give them a nod. If you get the IRS to throw their hands up, there's something pretty impressive about that.
Exactly, yes.
But you said that a lot of Scientologists are Trump supporters, right?
Well, I've noticed over the years that Scientologists tend to be more conservative than I do know liberal Scientologists, but it tends to be more of a right-leaning group. They don't have much political influence because even politicians realize that they're kind of nutty. But I did notice coming into the election that a lot of current and former Scientologists were Trump supporters. And then the LA Times did a great story that the only precinct in all of Los Angeles that voted for Trump was the one that included the Scientology headquarters, because all those workers actually live there on the base, and they all voted for Trump.
So it is, maybe there's a bit of a conservative base.
Well, I thought it was a little surprising because the Scientology's never had a friend in the White House like Bill Clinton.
Yeah,
because Bill signed that. The thing, it started under Bush 1, but Clinton signed it in 93, and then Bill went to bat for them overseas. He really harassed Germany over the fact that they were clamping down on Scientology. I don't know what Hillary's views were. I was not sure, but I kind of had a feeling that if she became president, that Scientology might have a pretty easy go of it.
You think maybe Scientology knew a young lady friend of Bill's?
I don't know.
There were thetans on my penis. She cleaned them off.
But I don't know what's going on with Trump. I mean, on the one hand, I've got some conservative friends that assure me that they think they're going to be able to get Trump to crack down on Scientology. On the other hand, I mentioned Bob Duggan, the richest Scientologist. His wife, Trish, was at the inaugural. We saw her talking with Kellyanne Conway. So I think the Scientologists are making their move right now to try to, get in with Trump. So I don't know which way it's going to go under Trump.
Well, Tony, thank you. We have Bob Odenkirk will be here shortly. You're really interesting, man. And your blog is really interesting. And I wish I had read this book. It's called The Unbreakable Miss Lovely. It's available now. TonyOrtega.org.
I brought you a copy.
Oh, thank you. I would love to read that. And it's Tony Ortega 94 on Twitter. And next time we'd like to have you in when we don't have anybody else coming in after. You're a really interesting guy.
Thanks for having me on. It's
Thank
great.
you, Tony, very much.